Commerce Alive Today presents
US Airways. The company was originally incorporated in Delaware in 1937 as All American Aviation Incorporated by a glider pilot named Richard C. Dupont, of the Delaware Dupont. On May 12, 1939, the airline began to deliver mail around the mountains of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Since many communities did not have airstrips, the company devised a system employing hooks and ropes that enabled the mail plane to drop off one mailbag and pick up another without landing. DuPont's method brought regular mail service to a number of once isolated communities and was widely imitated. Later, All American began transporting passengers on its limited network. Despite the addition of more destinations, the airline remained a small operation, serving many remote communities throughout the Alleghenies. When the United States became involved in World War II, DuPont went to work on the Army's glider program in California. The mailbag snare he developed was adapted by the Army's Air Corps and used to rescue downed pilots behind enemy lines. DuPont also helped to develop a glider that could be picked up by an already airborne airplane, a system that was used in the evacuation of Allied troops from the Remagen beachhead in Germany. DuPont was killed in a glider crash in 1943. After the war, All American Aviation changed its name to All American Airways. In 1953, Allegheny's network blanketed Pennsylvania, reaching Newark, NJ to Cleveland and Huntington, WV. It added Detroit in 1956, Boston in April 1960, LaGuardia in 1964, Norfolk in 1966, Toronto in 1967, and Louisville, Nashville, Memphis in 1968. The Lake Central Airlines merger in July 1968 added Chicago and St. Louis, and the Mohawk Airlines merger in April 1972 added Montreal, Minneapolis and many New York cities. Houston in 1978, then Florida at the end of 1978 and Phoenix in 1979. On November 14, 1955, an Allegheny Airlines Martin 202 was undertaking training flights at Wilmington Airport in New Castle County, Delaware, when the number 1 engine caught fire during a single-engine approach. On landing, the left main landing gear collapsed, and the aircraft was withdrawn from service and used for spare parts. In 1959, Allegheny debuted its first turbine airliner, a Convair 540, a Convair 340 with the piston engines replaced by Napier Elands. When Rolls-Royce bought Napier, it dropped the Eland, so 540s in the United States reverted to piston. Allegheny's last 540 flights were in 1962. The airline bought new Fairchild F-27JS that the company named Vistaliner. The F-27J was a US-built version of the Fokker F-27. The airline switched to General Motors/Allison turboprops in the Convair 580, which the carrier named the Vista Cruiser. The first CV580 flight was in June 1965. The last DC-3 flights were in 1962 and the last piston flights were in 1967. On December 1, 1959, Allegheny Airlines Flight 371, a Martin 202, crashed into a mountain on approach to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, United States. There were 25 fatalities. In 1960, Allegheny headquarters were in Washington, D.C. On October 19, 1962, an Allegheny Airlines flight attendant, Françoise de Maurière, fell to her death after being blown out a Convair 440 emergency exit door on a flight from Washington, D.C., to Providence, Rhode Island, during a scheduled descent into Hartford, Connecticut. This incident inspired James Dickey's poem Falling. In 1965, Allegheny announced it would add the first jet aircraft type to its fleet, the Douglas DC-9-10, which the airline stated would be placed into service in 1966. Allegheny then added other jets, notably the McDonnell Douglas DC-9-30, which the company named the VistaJet. Later jets included Boeing 727-100S, 727-200S and McDonnell Douglas DC-950S. The Mohawk merger added British Aircraft Corporation BAC-111 jets to the fleet as well. Allegheny Airlines was also the first airline with a network of affiliated regional airlines, the Allegheny Commuter System, which began with Henson Airlines in 1967. On July 23, 1965, Allegheny Airlines Flight 604 crashed northeast of the Williamsport Regional Airport due to a right engine failure and subsequent failure to follow engine-out procedures by the flight crew. None of the 40 occupants on board were killed, but 23 were injured. On November 29, 1966, Allegheny Airlines Flight 305, operated by a Convair 440, suffered a complete electrical failure on takeoff from Capital City Airport in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The pilots attempted to abort the takeoff, but the reversers did not work, and the aircraft overran the runway, striking an approach light tower. The cause of the failure was later determined to be an improperly installed heater. On December 24, 1968, Allegheny Airlines Flight 736, a Convair 580, crashed on approach to Bradford, Pennsylvania, killing 20 of the 47 people on board. On January 6, 1969, Allegheny Airlines Flight 737, a Convair 580, also crashed on approach to Bradford, Pennsylvania, killing 11 of the 28 people on board. On September 9, 1969, Allegheny Airlines Flight 853, a DC-9 en route from Cincinnati to Indianapolis, collided with a small private plane and crashed into a soybean field southeast of Indianapolis, near Shelbyville, Indiana, killing all 83 people aboard both aircraft. On June 7, 1971, Allegheny Airlines Flight 485, a Convair 580, en route from Washington, D.C., to New Haven, Connecticut crashed short of the runway at New Haven. 26 passengers and 2 crew members were killed, 2 passengers and 1 crew member survived. Pilot error was the cause of the crash. On June 23, 1976, Allegheny Airlines Flight 121, a DC-9, crashed on the runway due to wind shear at Philadelphia International Airport. There were 86 injuries and no fatalities. On July 9, 1978, Allegheny Airlines Flight 453 crash-landed at Greater Rochester International Airport while arriving from Boston Logan International Airport. The BAC-111 aircraft was carrying 77 people, and there was 1 serious injury. On February 12, 1979, Allegheny Airlines Flight 561, a NOR 262 bound for Washington National Airport crashed shortly after takeoff from North Central West Virginia Airport because of snow on the aircraft's wing and empennage surfaces. 2 died out of the 25 passengers and crew on board. As deregulation dawned, Allegheny, looking to shed its regional image, changed its name to USAir on October 28, 1979. Fortunately for Allegheny, its chairman and president, Edwin Kolodny, had previously served with the Civil Aeronautics Board. This experience provided him with the knowledge to acquire and protect the company's right to fly to certain destinations, and to successfully raise fares. Before any of his policies could be put into effect, however, the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 was passed. Vigorously opposed to the passing of this act, Kolodny argued that permitting all airlines to freely enter into any market would allow the larger airlines, with their vast resources, to raid markets served by smaller companies with the intention of driving them out of business. This did not happen. Instead, the larger airlines used their new freedom under deregulation to contend with each other, while regional operators such as Allegheny were virtually unaffected. Deregulation also provided new opportunities for regional airlines. For the first time, Allegheny was allowed to operate long-haul routes to Texas and the West Coast. With such an opportunity, the company clearly required an improvement upon its Allegheny Air reputation. Kolodny decided to begin with a new name. He chose USAir over several other names, including Republic Airlines, which was later used by the old Minneapolis-based North Central Airlines. Allegheny officially became USAir on October 28, 1979. Under the name USAir, the company launched an advertising campaign in which it claimed to carry more passengers than Pan Am, fly to more cities than American, and have more flights than TWA. This coincided with the inauguration of new routes to the Southwest, which were originally intended to prevent company jets from remaining idle during the traditional winter slump in the northeastern markets. In addition, USAir planned to implement a Pittsburgh-London route, but withdrew the application due to fears of overambition. According to Kolodny, overexpansion is the most tempting of all possible sins of airline managements under deregulation. And, if overdone, it can result in a serious bellyache. In designing a route system, a carrier must limit its ego. As a result, the airline concentrated on consolidating its markets and strengthening its central Pittsburgh hub. Kolodny maintained that 2/3 of USAir travel was in markets of less than 1,000 miles, and USAir made it a point to concentrate on developing these local markets. The short duration of these flights, however, meant that the airplanes had to make more takeoffs and landings, which in turn increased maintenance costs. In the late 1980s the company flew DC-9s, B-727s, 737s, 757s, 767s, as well as several smaller aircraft for its express fleet subsidiaries. The average age of its 446 planes was 9 years, one of the lowest averages in the industry. The airline's on-time record significantly improved as a result of strict attention to scheduling in the first flight of the day standard, which prevented late starts from pushing back the whole day's schedule. The airline also perfected a system of efficient bad weather maintenance. These measures contributed to what company officials claimed was the second lowest number of complaints to the cab delta was first based on passenger volume. In order to remain competitive with other airline companies that were merging to form even larger companies, the USAir Group announced in December 1986 that it would be acquiring Pacific Southwest Airlines for $400 million. The announcement surprised many industry analysts because USAir's predominantly East Coast airline network had few integration points with PSA, which was concentrated along the West Coast. First operated as a subsidiary of the USAir Group, PSA was later absorbed by USAir. The merger increased the amount of traffic on USAir by 40% and gave USAir landing rights in a number of cities on the West Coast. On February 21, 1986, a USAir McDonnell Douglas DC-9-31, registration N961VJ, operating as Flight 499 on a scheduled flight from Toronto Pearson International Airport, overran runway 24 during a tailwind landing, striking a runway light and a fence and came to rest on a perimeter road. One passenger suffered minor injuries, while the other 17 passengers and 5 crew were uninjured. The aircraft was badly damaged and was written off. Unable to land on runway 6 due to inadequate visibility, the pilots instead chose to land on runway 24 due to more favorable visibility minimums, although tailwind landings were not authorized in snow. The aircraft touched down late at an excessive airspeed and braking on the snowy runway was poor. The crash was attributed to the pilot in command's improper decision-making and failure to perform a go-around. On September 20, 1989, USAir Flight 5050, a Boeing 737-400, was a passenger flight that crashed on takeoff from LaGuardia Airport in Queens, New York. As the plane took off from LaGuardia's runway 31, the plane drifted to the left. After hearing a loud bang, the pilots attempted to reject the takeoff, but were unable to stop the plane short of the end of the runway. The plane continued past the end of the runway and plunged into Bowery Bay. 2 passengers were killed. On February 1, 1991, USAir Flight 1493, a Boeing 737-300, collided with SkyWest Airlines Flight 5569, a Fairchild Swearingen Metroliner turboprop aircraft, upon landing at Los Angeles International Airport. As Flight 1493 was on final approach, the local controller was distracted, though air traffic was not heavy at LAX, by a series of abnormalities, including a misplaced flight progress strip and an aircraft that had inadvertently switched off the tower frequency. The SkyWest flight was told to taxi into takeoff position, while the USAir flight was landing on the same runway. Upon landing, the 737 collided with the smaller turboprop Metroliner, which was crushed beneath the larger USAir jet as it continued down the runway, caught fire, and veered into an airport fire station. Rescue workers arrived in minutes and began to evacuate the 737, but because of the intense fire, 3 of the 737's 6 exits were unusable, including both front exits. Front passengers could only use one of the 2 overwing exits, causing a bottleneck. All 12 people aboard the smaller plane were killed, along with an eventual total of 23 of the 89 occupants of the 737, with most deaths on the 737 caused by asphyxiation in the fire. The National Transportation Safety Board found that the probable cause of the accident was the procedures in use at the LAX control tower, which provided inadequate redundancy, leading to a loss of situational awareness by the local controller, and inadequate oversight by the Federal Aviation Administration for failing to supervise the control tower managers. The crash led directly to the NTSB's recommendation of using different runways for takeoffs and landings at LAX. USAir entered 1992 battered by a poor economy, as well as the fallout from a trouble-ridden merger with North Carolina-based Piedmont in 1987. The company had suffered 3 consecutive years of net losses, the largest in 1990, at $454 million, the forfeiture of many domestic routes, fierce price wars, and a series of staff reductions and wage freezes. Augie Silpakas, writing for the New York Times, declared, USAir continues to bleed, but at a much slower rate. Costs have been cut, through a mix of layoffs, deferred orders of new planes and the closing of overlapping facilities. According to Sulpakas, the company, if not yet sound financially, had nonetheless succeeded in refurbishing its public image. No longer or, at least, not so often is the carrier referred to as useless air because of problems with flight delays, lost luggage and surly employees. Meanwhile, Kolodny retired in 1991, with Seth Schofield taking over as CEO. On March 22, 1992, USAir suffered a tragedy when Flight 405, bound from LaGuardia to Cleveland, crashed into Flushing Bay within minutes after takeoff. 27 people, more than half of the flight's passengers, were killed. The crash, under investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, was precipitated by a blustery snowstorm and problems involved in de-icing planes at LaGuardia once they had been cleared for takeoff. Following encouraging news from market analysts that USAir would bolster its East Coast presence with the acquisition of a minority stake in the Trump Shuttle renamed USAir Shuttle and major slot expansions at LaGuardia and Washington National, British Airways plc announced in July 1992 that it had arranged to form a strong alliance with USAir and would purchase a 44% stake in USAir for $750 million. Colin Marshall, chief executive of the profitable BA, intended to create a dependable feeder market of overseas routes through the U.S. carrier. But American, United, and Delta Airlines, the U.S. Big Three, vigorously lobbied against the deal and demanded enhanced access to the British market if the deal was to be approved by the U.S. government. In December 1992 the purchase was blocked. In early 1993 BA and USAir restructured their agreement into a $400 million BA purchase of 25% of USAir. This investment/alliance, under which USAir gave up its London routes, received U.S. government approval. The government also approved a code-sharing arrangement that enabled the partners to offer their customers a seamless operation when they used both airlines to reach their destination. On July 2, 1994, USAir Flight 1016, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9-31, was a regularly scheduled flight in the southeastern United States, between Columbia, South Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina. On July 2, 1994, the flight encountered heavy thunderstorms and microburst-induced wind shear while attempting to land, and crashed into heavy trees and a private residence near the airport. The crash and ensuing fire caused 37 fatalities and seriously injured 20 others. On September 8, 1994, USAir Flight 427 was a scheduled flight from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport to Palm Beach International Airport, Florida, with a stopover at Pittsburgh International Airport. The Boeing 737 flying this route crashed in Hopewell Township, Pennsylvania while approaching runway 28R at Pittsburgh, which was USAir's largest hub at the time. This accident was the second longest air crash investigation in history. The investigation into USAir 427 helped to also solve the crash of United Airlines Flight 585. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the probable cause was that the aircraft's rudder malfunctioned and went hard over in a direction opposite to that commanded by the pilots, causing the plane to enter an aerodynamic stall from which Captain Peter Germano and First Officer Charles B. Emmett III were unable to recover. All 132 people on board were killed, making the accident the deadliest air disaster in Pennsylvania's history. The reports indicated that hot hydraulic fluid entering the rudder's dual servo valve froze, causing the rudder to work in the opposite direction. USAir continued to be beset by its high-cost operating structure, and posted losses in 1993 and 1994, marking 6 straight years in the red. It was also the subject of bankruptcy speculation in the press. Under Schofield's plan to cut expenses by $1 billion a year and helped by a resurgent U.S. economy, USAir returned to profitability in 1995, posting net income of $119 million. In late 1995 Schofield, frustrated in his efforts to secure concessions from the company's pilots, suddenly announced his resignation. In January 1996 Stephen M. Wolf, former chief executive of United Airlines, came out of semi-retirement to become chairman and CEO of USAir. Wolf quickly brought in a former colleague of his at United, Rakesh Gangwal, as president and chief operating officer. Wolf and Gangwal made the attainment of union concessions a key to the company's future. While negotiations continued, the company announced in November 1996 that the parent company would change its name to US Airways Group Inc. and USAir would become US Airways, changes that took effect in February 1997. Around this same time, the company's alliance with BA fell apart after BA announced an alliance with American Airlines, with lawsuits following. The US Airways BA code-sharing deal expired in March 1997. In late 1997, US Airways finally reached an agreement with the pilots' union on a 5-year deal that established pay parity with the 4 largest US carriers. With this concession in hand, the company was able to proceed with an order for 400 Airbus A320s, scheduled for delivery from 1998 through 2009. The new airplanes would enable US Airways to continue as a major airline, rather than being forced to shrink into a regional one. A newly revitalized US Airways made a host of strategic maneuvers during 1998. The company purchased full control of US Airways Shuttle, in which it had held a minority stake since 1992, launched the low-cost, low-fare Metro jet carrier to help it compete against Delta Express and Southwest Airlines, which had encroached into US Airways' core markets, reached an agreement with Airbus to purchase up to 30 wide-body A330-300 aircraft for international flights, added to its transatlantic service with the debut of Philadelphia-London, Philadelphia-Amsterdam, and Pittsburgh-Paris runs, and, finally, entered into a marketing alliance with American Airlines involving linked frequent flyer programs and reciprocal airport lounge facility access. In May 1998, Gangwal became president and CEO of US Airways Group, with Wolf remaining chairman. US Airways Group reported net income of $538 million in 1998, a reflection of its renewed strength. While the carrier had succeeded in cutting its high-cost structure and returned to the black, it faced severe challenges in an era of industry consolidation. Other major carriers were rapidly linking up through global alliances, and it seemed likely that US Airways would have to become more aggressive in this area if it wanted to remain a major carrier itself. By the late 1990s, American Airlines had linked with both US Airways and BA, so it seemed possible that US Airways and BA would resurrect their partnership, perhaps creating an American US Airways BA trilateral alliance, which would certainly be a global airline power. In December 1998, US Airways contracted with Sabre Group Holdings to provide the airline's IT services for 25 years. The $4.3 billion deal gave US Airways the same computer reservation system as American Airlines. US Airways' home markets continued to be assailed by low-cost carriers Southwest Airlines Company and startup JetBlue Airways Corporation. The Metro Jet unit was growing, though the company would not say whether it was profitable. By the summer of 1999, Metro Jet was connecting 23 cities with 40 aircraft. US Airways was also expanding its transatlantic flights, flying to London's Gatwick Airport from Philadelphia and Charlotte. The Caribbean was probably the most promising area of growth. Its influence concentrated in the Northeast. US Airways was not truly a national airline. Chairman Stephen Wolf stated it needed a larger partner to avoid the fate of other mid-sized airlines like Eastern and Pan Am. United Airlines, then the world's largest carrier, announced plans to buy US Airways for $4.3 billion in May 2000. The deal would have created an airline with 145,000 employees and 500,000 passengers a day. US Airways' strengths along the East Coast would mesh nicely with United's cross-country routes. To fend off antitrust criticism, the companies planned to sell off most of US Airways' Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. operations to a newly formed, minority-owned airline, USAir. Led by Black entertainment television founder Robert L. Johnson, USAir would be operationally dependent upon United for at least its first few years. However, the proposal was not enough to get past a Justice Department that was already moving to undo Northwest Airlines Corporation's purchase of a controlling interest in Continental Airlines Incorporated. Opponents of the deal feared the merger would set in motion a major consolidation of the industry, reducing the number of dominant carriers from 6 to 3. Further, United's powerful pilots' union opposed the deal over pay and seniority issues. Although United invited American Airlines to take 49% of USAir and 50% of the US Airways shuttle with the odd provision that it gives its half of the shuttle back should American's national market share pass United's by more than 7.5%. With opposition from lawmakers, the Justice Department, labor unions, Wall Street, and consumer advocates, the deal was called off in July 2001. US Airways laid off 11,000 employees after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks and trimmed its fleet 25% to 310 aircraft. The Metro Jet unit was abandoned. In the next year, the carrier would receive $320 million in federal aid to keep it afloat, as well as a $900 million loan guarantee, conditional upon the airline cutting costs $1.2 billion a year through 2008. US Airways lost $2.1 billion in 2001. Business traffic, on which the airline depended, had begun a serious downturn early in the year. Rakesh Gangwal resigned as US Airways CEO in November 2001. His role was taken over for a while by Chairman Stephen Wolf. Formerly head of Avis Rent-A-Car, David N. Siegel became the company's CEO in March 2002. He soon presented the first draft of a recovery plan that sought to make US Airways a lower-cost carrier. The number of 50-seat regional jets in the fleet was to be doubled to 140, and operated by Mid-Atlantic Airways Incorporated, formerly Potomac Air, a subsidiary formed during the United merger discussions. US Airways and its would-be merger partner, United, announced the two carriers were cooperating in a code-share deal in July 2002. This marketing arrangement allowed each to sell tickets on each other's flights, and to honor each other's frequent flyer programs. US Airways also had code-share arrangements with smaller operations Transstates, Chautauqua Airlines, and Mesa Air Group, which had invested in US Airways stock after 9/11. A new Go Caribbean alliance was also soon worked out with Caribbean Star Airlines, Nevis Express, and WinAir. US Airways filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on August 11, 2002. Soon, David Bonderman's Texas Pacific Group, which had bailed out Continental Airlines while US Airways CEO David Siegel was employed there in America West, provided $200 million to keep US Airways flying. If the reorganization were successful, TPG would own 38% of the carrier. However, TPG was edged out at the last minute by Retirement Systems of Alabama, which acquired 37.5% of US Airways Group for $240 million. Retirement Systems, which had assets of $25 billion, also provided $400 million in debtor-in-possession financing. The airline continued to cut back staff and flights. The unions, concerned that US Airways successfully emerged from its bankruptcy, agreed to $900 million in labor cuts. The industry as a whole was dealt another massive blow in December, when Yule Corporation, parent of United Airlines, declared bankruptcy as well. In August 2002, US Airways Group Inc. filed for bankruptcy protection in an effort to correct its financial problems brought on by rising costs and the post-September 11 drop-off in air travel. On September 12, 2004, US Airways Group and most of its subsidiaries filed for bankruptcy protection for the second time in 3 years. US Airways Group and the aforementioned subsidiaries, including US Airways, emerged from Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection with the help $125 million equity investment from Air Wisconsin's parent company Air Wisconsin Airlines Corporation on September 27, 2005, in connection with the completion of its merger with America West Holdings Corporation. On May 19, 2005, US Airways Group announced that it would merge with Tempe, Arizona-based America West Holdings Corporation, whose strength in the West would complement US Airways routes in the Northeast, Europe, and the Caribbean. Prior to merging with America West Holdings Corporation, US Airways Group was based in Arlington County, Virginia. At the time of announcement, plans called for the new entity to retain the US Airways brand, its dividend miles frequent flyer program, and participation in the Star Alliance subject to the approval of partner United Airlines. However, it would be headquartered at America West corporate offices and America West executives and board members would be in control of the merged company. The merger was completed on September 27, 2005. On June 9, 2005, the 2005 Logan Airport runway incursion was a near collision that occurred at approximately 7:40 p.m. EDT, between Aer Lingus Flight 132 and US Airways Flight 1170. EI-132 was an Airbus A330-300 aircraft, owned and operated by the Irish airline Aer Lingus, destined for Shannon, Ireland, and carrying 12 crew members and 260 passengers. US Airways Flight 1170 was a Boeing 737-300 flight destined for Philadelphia and carrying 6 crew members and 103 passengers. The near collision took place on the runway at Logan International Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. In October 2006, US Airways leased new office space in a building across the street from its corporate headquarters in Tempe, Arizona to expand and centralize its corporate operations. On November 15, 2006, US Airways Group announced a proposal to purchase Delta Air Lines for $8.0 billion, half of this amount to be paid in cash with the remainder to be paid in stock. US Airways Group had obtained a firm commitment from Citibank to provide financing for both the cash portion of the merger offer, as well as the required secured loan refinancing at both airlines. The combined airlines would have flown under the Delta Air Lines name. Delta Air Lines repeatedly stated its intentions of exiting bankruptcy as a standalone carrier. On December 19, 2006, Delta's board of directors officially rejected US Airways' offer. The final decision, however, was up to Delta Airlines creditors as well as a bankruptcy judge as to what would happen. Delta employees, represented by the Delta Board Council and the Airline Pilots Association, organized against what they termed the hostile takeover effort by US Airways under the title Keep Delta My Delta. A rally against the US Airways merger at the Georgia International Convention Center was held December 13, 2006, and attended by nearly 3,000 pilots, family members, and other supporters. On January 10, 2007, US Airways upped their bid for Delta from $8.5 billion to $10.2 billion, and imposed a deadline of February 1 for Delta's creditors' committee to move forward with the deal. The move was made, according to US Airways President Scott Kirby, to remove any doubt that the US Airways offer was the best one on the table. On January 31, 2007, following a decision by the creditors' committee to support Delta's standalone reorganization plan, US Airways withdrew its merger offer. On January 15, 2009, US Airways Flight 1549 was a regularly scheduled US Airways flight from New York City's LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte and Seattle, in the United States. The Airbus A320 serving the flight struck a flock of birds shortly after takeoff from LaGuardia, losing all engine power. Given their position in relation to the available airports in their low altitude, pilots Chesley Sully Sullenberger and Jeffrey Skiles decided to glide the plane to ditching on the Hudson River near Midtown Manhattan. All 155 people on board were rescued by nearby boats. There were no fatalities, although 100 people were injured, 5 of them seriously. The time from the bird strike to the ditching was less than 4 minutes. The governor of New York State, David Paterson, called the incident a miracle on the Hudson, and a National Transportation Safety Board official described it as the most successful ditching in aviation history. Flight simulation showed that the airplane could have returned to LaGuardia had it turned toward the airport immediately after the bird strike. However, the board found that scenario did not account for real-world considerations, and affirmed the ditching as providing the highest probability of survival, given the circumstances. The pilots and flight attendants were awarded the Master's Medal of the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators in recognition of their heroic and unique aviation achievement. In January 2012, US Airways expressed interest to take over American Airlines, and the AMR CEO said in March that American is open to merger. As of September 2012, American Airlines, under Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, was looking to merge with another airline. In July of that year, in a bankruptcy court filing, US Airways disclosed that it was an American Airlines creditor and prospective merger partner. Then on August 31, 2012, US Airways CEO Doug Parker announced that American Airlines and US Airways had signed a non-disclosure agreement, in which the airlines would discuss their financials and a possible merger. On February 14, 2013, US Airways Group and AMR Corporation officially announced that the two companies would merge to form the largest airline in the world. The combined airline will carry the American Airlines name and branding, while US Airways management team, including CEO Doug Parker, will retain most operational management positions. The headquarters for the new airline will also be consolidated at American's current headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas.
For the ultimate ice cream experience, you have to offer endless combinations. That's why Cold Stone creates simple hometown favorites and exotic twists. The same goes for US Airways, with over 225 worldwide destinations. We'll take you from hometowns and big cities to exotic tropical escapes. Getting Cold Stone where it needs to go. That's why I fly US Airways.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.